You know what it feels like to be conscious. You're experiencing it right now. Alert, aware, processing information. That's beta. You probably also know what it feels like to zone out, to daydream, to drift into that floaty space right before sleep. That's alpha sliding into theta. But there is a state above all of that, a state where your brain fires faster than normal waking consciousness, where separate regions of the brain that usually operate independently suddenly lock into perfect rhythm with each other, and where people report experiences so vivid and so overwhelming that they describe them as more real than anything they felt with their eyes open. Joe Dispenza calls it superconscious. Neuroscience calls it gamma. After measuring thousands of ordinary people reaching this state at his retreats and watching what happened to their bodies, their emotions, and their lives afterward, Joe Dispenza believes this is not some rare mystical accident. He believes it is what the human brain was built for. We just forgot how to turn it on. And to understand what gamma actually is and why it seems to change people so dramatically, we need to start with how your brain actually works when you're sitting here doing nothing special, just being you. Right now, your brain is producing electrical patterns called brainwaves. They are measurable on an EEG, and they cycle at different speeds depending on what state you are in. The state you spend the vast majority of your waking life in is called beta. It ranges from about 12 to 32 cycles per second, and it is the brainwave of conscious engagement with the outside world. You are in beta when you are working, talking, scrolling through your phone, worrying about a deadline, replaying a conversation you had yesterday. Beta is functional. It keeps you alert and responsive. But there are different levels of beta, and this is where it gets important. Low beta is fine. It is calm focus. Mid-beta is a little more amped, like right before you give a presentation. But high beta is where the problems start. High beta is the frequency of stress, anxiety, anger, obsessive thinking. It is your brain's alarm system cranked all the way up. When people get stuck in high beta, which millions of people are, they start depending on things outside themselves to feel different. Food, alcohol, social media, shopping. Anything to change their internal state because they cannot do it on their own. Dispenza describes this as being trapped. Your attention is locked on the outer world. You are hyper-focused on threats, real or imagined. And you are completely identified with your body, your problems, your timeline, your story. You are, in every sense, running on survival mode. And the vast majority of people never leave it. They wake up in high beta, they go to bed in high beta, and they wonder why they feel exhausted, stuck, and disconnected. But survival mode is not the only setting your brain has. Below beta sits alpha. Alpha waves cycle at 8 to 12 hertz, and they show up when you close your eyes, take a breath, and relax. Alpha is the state where your inner world starts to become more real than your outer world. That constant voice in your head, the one narrating everything, judging everything, planning everything, starts to quiet down. You become less analytical. And that shift matters more than you might think, because according to Dispenza, the analytical mind is the gatekeeper between your conscious mind and your subconscious mind. So when your brainwaves slow from beta into alpha, you are not just relaxing. You are starting to slip past the bouncer. You are approaching the operating system that runs your body beneath the surface. Below alpha, you hit theta. Theta runs at 4 to 8 cycles per second, and it is the frequency you pass through every single night as you fall asleep. It is deeply hypnotic. You are suggestible. The neocortex, the part of the brain that holds your identity, your memories, your personality, starts going dark. The known version of you begins to dissolve. Dispenza describes this as the moment you become nobody, no one, no thing, nowhere in no time. Everything that makes you you in everyday life falls away. And for most people, that is where consciousness stops. They lose awareness and fall asleep. But Dispenza's entire method is built around one idea. What if you could stay awake through that transition? What if you could keep your mind conscious while your body descended into theta? Because on the other side of that threshold, something else is waiting. Gamma brainwaves sit at the very top of the frequency spectrum. They fire at over 32 cycles per second, with a lot of the scientific interest centered on the 38 to 42 hertz range. And for decades, the neuroscience community basically ignored them. They assumed gamma was noise, meaningless electrical chatter. Then researchers started looking at who was actually producing gamma. The pattern was hard to ignore. Talented musicians showed elevated gamma activity during peak performance. Top-tier athletes had it during moments of total precision. People with extraordinary memory recall showed it. And in 2004, neuroscientist Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin ran a study on Tibetan Buddhist monks who had clocked over 10,000 hours of meditation practice. What he found changed the conversation completely. These monks were producing gamma wave activity at amplitudes and levels of synchronization that had never been recorded in a scientific setting before. Their brains were not just active. Distant regions of the brain that normally work independently were suddenly firing in perfect unison, as if the entire brain had locked into a single coherent rhythm. Davidson linked these gamma bursts to the monks' practice of compassion meditation. What the monks described during those states, feelings of boundless love, deep interconnection, a complete dissolution of the boundary between self and other, matched what the EEG data was showing. The brain was literally binding itself together. Meanwhile, researchers found the opposite pattern in people struggling with depression, ADHD, anxiety, and learning difficulties, reduced gamma, fragmented brainwave activity. It was as if their brains were running out of sync with themselves. So the question became obvious. If gamma was connected to peak mental performance, emotional depth, and brain-wide integration, could you train people to access it? Could you do it faster than 40 years on a mountain in Tibet? That is the question Joe Dispenza decided to answer. The way he went about it was unusual. He did not study monks, he studied regular people. Over the last decade, Dispenza and his research team have performed over 9,000 brain scans at his meditation retreats around the world. These are week-long events where hundreds, sometimes more than 1,000 people, sit together and practice guided meditation for hours each day. A peer-reviewed study published in 2020 looked at a group of 468 participants, ranging in age from 19 to 83. The critical detail is that nearly all of them were meditation novices. Some had never closed their eyes and sat in silence in their lives. They attended a 3-day workshop with daily guided meditation sessions, music, open focus awareness exercises, and practices designed to cultivate specific emotional states. The researchers hooked them up to EEG machines and measured brainwave power bands before and after every session. Over 5,000 scans in total. The results were striking. Theta activity jumped by 29% from baseline. Alpha increased by 16%. Gamma, the brainwave that many researchers assume took monks decades to cultivate, increased by 11% across the group. But what really caught the attention of the researchers was the speed. There was a 76% probability that participants entered the meditative brainwave state within the first minute of each session. First minute, these were beginners. Dispenza's team pushed further at a retreat in Bonn, Germany, where they brought in neuroscientists to measure brains in real time during meditation. What they found added another layer to the story. When participants transitioned from beta to alpha, it was not just regular alpha, it was coherent alpha. Measured across 19 different regions of the brain, billions of neurons were suddenly operating in rhythm, in order, in lockstep. As the coherence increased, so did the amplitude, meaning more energy was flowing through the brain. And more energy in the brain, according to Dispenza, translates directly into a greater level of awareness, a greater level of consciousness. From coherent alpha, participants dropped into coherent theta. The neocortex went quiet, the analytical brain shut down, and then the scans showed something they had not expected. When theta elevated beyond its normal range, it appeared to become a precursor for gamma. The autonomic nervous system, seated in the limbic brain, activated while the neocortex stayed suppressed. People were, in Dispenza's words, having profoundly lucid experiences that felt more real than waking life. Their bodies were deeply asleep. Their minds were wider awake than they had ever been. And here's the part that broke the researchers' model. At a week-long retreat in Denver, Dispenza's team upgraded their scanning technology and started tracking the relationship between the heart and the brain during a meditation called synchronizing the heart and the brain. When people relaxed deeply and brought their attention to their heart center, the heart began producing a very low frequency signal, a frequency that, according to the researchers, is indigenous only to the energy of the heart. That signal traveled upward to the brain, and at first, the brainwaves did what you would expect. They slowed down. But then something shifted. The heart's energy began to act as a carrier wave. Other brainwave frequencies started riding on top of it, and suddenly the brain snapped into coherent harmonic states across multiple bands at once. Coherent theta, coherent alpha, coherent beta, and coherent gamma all fired simultaneously in elegant ordered patterns. Now in physics, there is a basic rule. When energy moves through matter, it weakens. Sound waves traveling away from a drum get quieter the further they go. That is how the physical world works. But in these scans, the opposite was happening. The frequency and intensity of energy in the brain kept accelerating. It was not dissipating. It was building, getting faster, getting more organized. The brain was producing more energy than the heart had sent. The team's conclusion was simple. The more relaxed and heart-centered people became, the more their brains opened up to energy. There appeared to be a zone, a sweet spot, where the body was profoundly calm while the mind reached levels of wakefulness beyond anything that happens in normal daily life. That zone was coherent gamma. So what actually happens to people when they reach this state? This is where the story gets both fascinating and controversial. Dispenza's retreats have generated thousands of personal reports from participants describing dramatic shifts, restored hearing, significant reduction in the symptoms of degenerative conditions, chronic pain that vanished during a single meditation session, autoimmune conditions that reversed after a week of practice. His team says they are now conducting scientific studies on the biological effects of every brainwave state they have measured. Now, I want to be straight with you. Testimonials are not clinical trials. The people at these retreats are self-selected. They are motivated, they are invested, and they want to believe. The scientific community has raised real questions about the rigor of some of these claims, and that skepticism is healthy. But here's what is harder to argue with. The EEG data is measurable and reproducible. Independent research on Tibetan monks confirmed gamma synchrony during compassion meditation years before Dispenza started measuring it. Clinical trials on mindfulness practices have documented measurable increases in immune markers like salivary immunoglobulin A and decreases in cortisol, the stress hormone. And the emerging neuroscience consensus around gamma is that it plays a critical role in integrating neural activity across the entire brain, which could explain why people in that state report feeling a sense of wholeness, clarity, and deep knowing that they have never experienced before. The mechanism is not magic. It is measurable. Whether the healings themselves will hold up under rigorous clinical testing is a different question, and one that deserves serious investigation. But let us talk about the practical piece. The obvious question watching this is, okay, how do I actually get there? Dispenza's core technique starts with attention. You sit with your eyes closed and focus on different parts of your body, one at a time. But the key isn't the body. The key is that you simultaneously become aware of the space that surrounds each body part. And then you keep expanding. The space around your body, the space in the room, the space beyond the room. You keep widening until your attention is resting on nothing but infinite space. What this does neurologically is shift your brain from a narrow convergent focus, which keeps you locked in beta, to an open divergent focus. And the moment your focus opens like that, the analytical mind starts to disengage. Beta slows into alpha. Alpha deepens into theta. And if you can stay awake, if you can keep your mind conscious while your body drops into that deep, restful state, you're in the territory where gamma becomes accessible. Dispenza emphasizes that the sleep transition is a critical window. Every night, your brain passes through alpha and theta naturally, but you lose consciousness during that transition. The skill he teaches is catching yourself in that twilight zone and remaining aware, training your brain to stay present while the body lets go completely. The retreats add another element that accelerates the process: heart coherence. By cultivating elevated emotions, real feelings of gratitude, care, appreciation, and compassion, while in a deeply relaxed state, participants appear to create the conditions where the heart's energy couples with the brain's activity. That heart-brain coupling is what the Denver research showed as the catalyst for coherent gamma. And the finding that Dispenza keeps repeating, the one that frustrates people who want it to be harder, is that the process isn't about effort. It isn't about concentration or force. The data showed the opposite. The deeper people relaxed and the more they settled into their hearts, the faster and more coherently their brains fired. Getting out of your own way, it turns out, might be the whole point. There is one more thing worth sitting with. Dispenza says certain words during meditations, and he can watch it happen on the EEG monitors in real time. 14 people, side by side, getting their brains scanned. He says a specific phrase. All 14 brains simultaneously shift into gamma. He says his team is getting more precise about which states they can induce and how long they can sustain them. With groups of 750 or 1,500 people practicing together, the effects compound. The energy in the room builds, and by the end of a week, changes start happening that he can't always explain with the data he has. Whether you find that inspiring or suspicious probably says more about your starting point than about the data itself. But here's what's hard to deny. There is a brainwave state that sits above everything you normally experience. It has been measured in the highest performing humans on the planet. It is correlated with deep insight, compassion, and brain-wide integration. Its absence tracks with depression, anxiety, and cognitive fragmentation. And a growing body of research, still early, still incomplete, but growing, suggests that ordinary people can learn to access it through disciplined inner practice. Your brain already produces gamma. It does it in tiny bursts when you have a flash of insight, when something suddenly clicks, when you feel a wave of deep connection or understanding. Those moments aren't accidents, they are glimpses. The question Dispenza is really asking, the one that makes the scientific establishment uncomfortable and makes thousands of people fly across the world to sit in a hotel ballroom for a week, is whether those glimpses can become a way of living. Whether the ceiling of human consciousness is actually a floor that nobody's been standing on.